I am so thrilled to be here to talk to you about my favorite topic, and that is busting silos. If you've never listened to my podcast, you should know that it ends every single episode with "Let's go bust some silos," because I think that silos are one of the most detrimental things that exist in higher education. And I think they hold us back from being successful and truly thriving. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we can bust the silos that exist between admissions and marketing in particular. As James said, I'm Jaime Hunt. I launched my consultancy this spring, and I'm doing everything from branding to student journey maps to consulting on strategic communications projects. But most of all, the thing you need to know about me is I absolutely despise silos, and I always have. So, my question to start off with is, have you ever been inside a true silo? And I have. I'm going to tell you a little story about a time when my parents took my sisters and I hiking. And we were hiking in northern Minnesota, and we came across an abandoned barn with a abandoned silo. And I was probably about 10 years old. And I remember being really nervous about going into the silo, but going in kind of by myself and looking around and feeling sort of that dank air. I'm sure you can kind of imagine what that smelled like, this sort of dusty, moldy environment all around the circle of the silo, the bricks, the rock. I couldn't hear what was happening outside of the silo once I was inside it. I couldn't hear my sisters playing. I couldn't hear my parents talking to each other. It was totally this isolating experience. And when I looked up and saw like the dust floating in the air and the streams of light kind of coming through, it was this really disorienting feeling, this sense that I was alone in a space and lost touch with what was happening outside in the outside world and outside of the silo. And honestly, the institutional silos that we exist in higher education are not much different. I have a friend who came to higher education after a career in corporate America who told me this just amazing phrase: universities function like a group of independent franchisees rather than cohesive and unified institutions with a shared vision and goal. And that absolutely resonated with me. He probably said that to me about 8 years ago, and it has stuck in my head. We truly operate as though each of our divisions is its own independent entity. Sure, we have a strategic plan that guides the overarching vision for what we do, but on a day-to-day basis, most leaders are preoccupied with the goals that apply to them and with the accountability that they have to their leadership. And nobody is really thinking about that cross-silo, cross-department, cross-divisional interactions. And I think that's a major, major problem. It is not possible to tell an effective story from a silo. And that is something that I think higher ed marketing and admissions people need to be really concerned about. I think that effective storytelling is what drives people to want to engage with your institution, to want to enroll, to be able to see themselves there. I often say that facts inform and stories transform. And what we're trying to do as the people who are trying to bring students into our campus community is transform their minds and how they think about our institutions and how they think about themselves and what they bring to the institution. And to be able to tell that kind of story is incredibly challenging when we're in a silo. We are not able to hear and see what is happening outside of our own small worldview. When you think about what's happening in the colleges and what the deans are doing and what the faculty are doing and what the research office is doing, if we're not connecting those things in a cohesive way, we are not telling the full and true story of our institutions. And that is truly a shame because our students deserve much, much better than that. And our universities deserve much, much better than that. And we are much, much better than that. I think there are some incredibly big challenges that come as a result of the siloification of higher education. They make true interdisciplinary collaboration very difficult. When you are obsessed with accomplishing your departmental or unit or division goals, you're not going to seek out opportunities to collaborate people who are having that same mentality. And in a situation where you're talking about admissions and marketing, for example, you really need to have that collaboration. You really need to work hand in glove to be able to accomplish things for your institution. Silos also really limit opportunity to maximize resources. When I was at Miami University, I remember pulling in all of the directors of communications across the university. And Miami is a large institution. It's about 24,000 students, and there are communicators in every division. It was literally hundreds of people are involved in communications or recruitment. And when I brought in all of those people together, we discovered that there were people buying software that somebody else had bought. We found that there were people who were working with vendors that somebody else was also working with, and we weren't working collaboratively. And probably the absolute worst example that I have from that is we had one part of the university purchasing keywords that were also being purchased by another part of the university. And those two entities were in effect bidding against each other for those keywords. We were wasting so much money and so much effort in ways that we just could not get back, and in ways that were damaging our ability to be effective. I also think silos prevent us from really creating highly effective communications. When you're in a silo, you do not have the insights that would make your communications more impactful and more effective. And so when we break down those silos, that's what allows us to tell those more fulsome stories. I also think silos really hinder innovation, because innovation means bringing people together. Innovation requires you to have people who think in different ways about challenges to come together to solve those challenges together. And when you have a silo, that prevents you from being able to do that. It limits your ability to access those alternative perspectives. I also think silos are sort of a snake chasing its tail in a way. Silos are caused by territoriality, but they also invite territoriality. So if you live in this sort of circular bubble, you will protect that bubble against all costs. But that territoriality is what causes so many problems. When I talk to colleagues across the country and when I'm working with my clients, I love to see where admissions and marketing understand that they are in this together and that we have a shared objective. But what I see often is there's this territoriality between the VP of enrollment management and the VP of marketing. And this is something that absolutely has to stop. We cannot have situations where people are saying, this is my ground, this is your ground, you stay in your lane, I'll stay in mine. We need to splash in each other's lanes. We need to get in each other's pools in order to be truly effective. Because ultimately, silos do not serve our audiences or our institutions. Our number one goal should be serving our students. And when we break into silos, we are not able to do that in the way that they deserve. So ultimately, at the end of the day, silos must die. Unfortunately, silos are all we know. And there's a lot about higher education that makes silos be the way that we operate. So when you think about the leadership of an institution, typically the president and the provost have come from faculty. A lot of times, even the vice president of student affairs also tends to come from faculty. And when you think about what it takes to earn a PhD, it starts to become really clear what leads to silos. Earning a PhD is a relatively solitary endeavor. You are working on a dissertation for years by yourself. You are working in an environment where it's incredibly rigorous, it is incredibly territorial, it's incredibly competitive. And so what comes as an outcome from that is the siloification of higher education. I'm not going to sit here and say that it doesn't happen in corporate America. I'm sure there are plenty of people in the audience who come from corporate America and will say, Jaime, it's the same thing there. I'm just saying that this is one of the reasons, one of the things that causes these silos. So we have no other way of understanding how to operate in higher education. I would bet that most of the people on this call have always worked at institutions that are highly siloed. When you heard my bio, you heard that I've worked at 6 institutions and I've earned my degree at 2 others, and I now teach at an institution. My husband has worked at 3 other institutions. My siblings, one of my siblings works at an institution. All these institutions, this is a big group of institutions, are very, very siloed. Everybody I talk to, every leader that I meet with, every client that I have, everybody complains about the silos. And how do we bust out of them is the question. But first, I think we have to start thinking about what is the language that we use that kind of contributes to this silification. Siloed thinking is really thinking me versus we, or mine versus ours. And I tell a story when I give this presentation about my friend Brenda Allen. She was the provost at Winston-Salem State, and she was an applicant to be president of Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And Brenda is a fantastic human being, one of the most brilliant people I know. And I knew she was going to get the job for that reason alone. But they also live streamed the interviews for the presidential candidates. So they had this town hall with the presidents. And I remember I watched 2 of her competitors and then her. And 2 of the competitors talked about me. I did this. This was mine. This was mine. And Brenda talked about we, ours. She talked about the group effort that went into everything. She talked about the institution that she was coming from as a place where people worked collaboratively towards shared goals. And I remember texting her and saying, you got this job. You're going to get this job, because she understood that this isn't about one person. This isn't about one division. This isn't about one thing. This is about all of us working together toward a goal. Another way that we think about how we talk contributes to silos. This idea of that's not my job or that's not my problem. I am confident that there are people who are in this session who've been in a situation where they've approached somebody about a problem that they're having, and the person has said, that's not my job, or that's not my problem. And instead of working together to try to figure out how to solve the problem, it's just sort of, I'm wiping my hands of it. This is yours to deal with. And that is really siloed thinking. That kind of attitude is part of what contributes to the silification of higher education. We have to bust out of that. We have to bust out of this idea of things not being our jobs or not our problems, and stop focusing on just what is in our job descriptions and what is in our objectives, and start thinking about what the institutional objectives are. Start thinking a little bit bigger and a little bit higher about the work that we're doing every day. Because at the end of the day, we are all in this together. There is no way that one person is going to be able to accomplish everything that needs to happen at a university to get students well educated and ready for their future. There's absolutely not one division that's responsible for it. There's not one department. There's not one single thing that is the thing that is going to make an institution successful. We are all working toward the same goal and the same mission. And if we don't all support that mission, we don't belong in higher education. We are truly all in this together, and we should be working with that attitude. We should be working with an attitude of, this is our shared vision, our shared objective. How can we come together to solve these problems and tackle these challenges to make our students successful? So ideally, we want to move away from silos and into synergy. And when I talk about synergy, I'm talking about working in cross-functional teams in an interdisciplinary way that's really, really collaborative, really, really in alignment, that's sort of guiding the work that you do, so that you're not just in one space thinking about just what you need to accomplish, but what needs to be accomplished for the institution. And I know when I've given this presentation before, I know that there are people in the audience who are saying, like, that's cool. I'm all in favor of busting silos, but I'm the only one. Or there's this one person, I'm going to call her Jennifer. No offense to any Jennifers in the audience, but Jennifer is just so difficult. And I am so struggle with working with her and with collaborating with her. That doesn't take the responsibility off of us as individuals to be striving towards that synergy. We all have difficult people in our lives, and holding that and making that be part of what keeps you from moving forward in a more synergistic way is not an effective way to work. When I talk about this idea of working with people that you may not like or may not have a good relationship with, I always say grudges are for your uncle at Thanksgiving. You have an uncle who has some sort of crazy conspiracy theories that he's always spouting at Thanksgiving. You don't have to sit next to him. You don't have to get along with him. You don't even have to go to that Thanksgiving party. But you do have to put some effort in when working with difficult people in a work environment. You do have to work together. You do have to go to meetings together. You do have to collaborate. And I can think about a time when I worked at an institution. I'm not going to name names because that's just mean. When I worked at an institution where there were two leaders who refused to be in meetings if the other one was there. So they would look at the list, and if they saw that the other person was going to be at the meeting, they would send a junior staff person to that meeting. They wouldn't communicate with that person. They wouldn't have anything to do with sharing any data, any resources. They wouldn't collaborate. And these were two really important positions that provided incredibly important functions for students and for the institution. They had some sort of falling out that led to a grudge that lasted literally years, literally years. And my point of view on that is, if Jennifer is your neighbor, you don't have to talk to your neighbor. If Jennifer is your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving, you don't have to talk to your crazy uncle. It's probably not James Jennifer. But if Jennifer is your colleague, you're going to have to work through it in order to serve your students. Otherwise, one of you is going to have to move on. And I hate to say it like that, but truly, that's how strongly I feel about silos and how much we need to bust them. When we work in this more synergistic way, we're talking about working more strategically and in alignment with each other. And we're also working toward a shared vision. I think probably most people, if you've been in higher ed for any amount of time, have seen examples of people who have a vision that seems to only benefit them and their portfolio or them and their resume. It's really hard for somebody to get away with that kind of vision or that kind of mentality when you're working in a more synergistic and collaborative way, because there will be more voices at the table informing the strategy, informing the execution, informing the goals. It's really hard for someone who's just trying to boost their resume to get away with that in a synergistic environment. Synergy also brings in diverse perspectives and diverse creativity. So why is that important? When we work in a manner that is very homogeneous, when we work in an environment with people who think just like us, we are not exposed to the possibilities of a different perspective. And I'm not just talking about perspectives that come from different backgrounds and expertise as employees or as knowledge workers, but I'm talking about the perspectives that come from different lived experiences. And then on the side that I'm talking about creativity, there are so many different types of creativity, but it tends to have people clump up with similar types of creativity working together. When you bring together more people and sort of stir that pot of creativity, you get more new ideas. You get things that are really going to help you break the boundaries between what your institution is doing and what other institutions are doing. And at the end of the day, there are 4,000 institutions of higher education in this country. At the end of the day, we need to stand out among our peers and competitors in order for students to see the value and to want to enroll at our institutions. So we need to have those super, super creative concepts be what is coming forward. And bringing multiple people together that maybe don't intersect all the time, bringing different types of creativity, different lived experiences together is what leads to a situation where you're actually doing something that's maybe never been done before, or that is really, truly innovative. I want to talk about an example of a time when we did this. I was when I was at Miami University, something to know about Miami University. Well, two things. The first is it's not in Florida. It's in Oxford, Ohio. And two, it's named Miami University because it's named after the Miami tribe, which has now been relocated to Oklahoma. And the lands on which the campus is was their traditional lands, and they were removed from it. And when I was at Miami University, I was challenged to put together an event that would recognize the 175th anniversary of the removal of the tribe from their lands. And I could have very easily just gone back into my office and thought, this is what we should do. We're going to have this event and there's going to be a podium and we're going to do all this and that. But I brought in people with widely diverse job functions to come together to help me brainstorm ideas for what we could do. And what we ultimately did was made a decision to have a group of people at one of the most important spots on campus to the tribe, do like a talk, a lecture about the experience. And then the entire group walked a mile past ribbons that represented each individual person who was displaced as a result of being taken from their lands. And it was a silent march with nothing but a drum beat, and it ended with a silent moment of reflection. It was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. People have said it was one of the most powerful experiences of their lives. And that was only possible because I brought more voices to the table. I brought more people in to say, hey, what do you think? What do you think would be impactful and powerful? And people brought their lived experiences to that conversation. And we were able to have an event that attracted more than 400 people and was absolutely one of the most powerful experiences that any of us could experience in our lifetimes. And what was most important was the chief of the tribe said that it was something that he was so proud and honored that we did to recognize their displacement. And that is what was important. And so that was only possible because I didn't say, I want this to be something that Jaime Hunt has set. I didn't want this to be, Jaime Hunt did this great event. It was, we are going to do this great thing together. Let's do this truly together. Bring your creativity to the table. Another benefit of synergy is a consistent student experience. And so I'm going to talk about a time when I was working as the chief marketing officer in that environment where there were people that didn't really enjoy working together. It wasn't as bad as where the two VPs wouldn't go to meetings together, but it was not great. And we were seeing that there were some communications going out that said that deadlines were at 5 o'clock on Friday, and some were saying the deadline was at 11:59 on Friday, and some were saying the deadline was a completely different day. And so students were getting all this sort of mess of communications. And when we started to peel back the onion layer, we discovered that this was not just these couple of communications. We were discovering that students were getting this wildly chaotic experience of communications as they were matriculating. And so we pulled in a group of all kinds of people across the campus, administrative assistants, associate directors, vice presidents, and we all came together to talk about how do we solve this problem so we can create a consistent student experience. So we can create something that really helps our students feel what the experience is going to be like if they attend the university, but also develop a greater understanding of what they need to do. Some of this was like functional things that they need to do before they enroll. And so by bringing all of these voices to the table, we were able to create much greater consistency so that students, when they came in, were hearing and seeing and feeling the same thing, regardless of who they were hearing it from. And I remember, and I'm not going to call out the institution, but I remember when we were reviewing the communications during that, there were communications from housing that were written like, we know you're going to screw this up. We know you're going to make a ton of mistakes. We already are acting like you're a loser. Things in all bold, all caps, underlined, red, highlighted, nothing friendly, nothing warm. Meanwhile, admissions is still trying to nurture students, right? You're still trying to do your yield and anti-melt efforts. And you have the housing office sending communications that are basically saying, you're a dum-dum or you're going to mess up. And this totally went counter to the experience that we wanted students to have on campus and the kind of experience we wanted students to believe they were going to have on campus. And by working more synergistically and having a more aligned vision for what we wanted to communicate to students, we were able to create a much more consistent student experience for those students. And then just this kind of goes without saying, because I was talking about how you can't tell a consistent story or a unified story when from a silo. With synergy, you have more unified storytelling. You are working from the same sheet of music, hitting the same high notes, having the same drum beat, really, really having this gorgeous choir that's telling and singing the story of your institution in a unified, harmonious, and beautiful way that transforms what the students think about who you are, what they think about what you offer, and what they think about what they're capable of and what will happen to them as a result of their degree. Truly, truly transformational storytelling requires this synergy where everybody is aligned on what are the types of stories that we're telling, what are we trying to communicate through these stories, what are the notes that we want to hit over and over and over and over so that they have that just grained into them when they think about our institution. This is so, so, so vitally important for success. And it's something that's only possible by busting down silos. I like this graphic because to me, it illustrates what I'm trying to say in a more visual way. So imagine you're a dog sled racer and you have your team of sled dogs. And in a dog sled, typically you have the dogs, well, always, you have the dogs all situated in a straight row going ahead of the sled. And when the dog sled runner says mush, the dogs go and they fly over the ice and snow. And they go so fast and they go so far. They cover absolutely unbelievable distances in absolutely amazing short periods of time. And they're all running like one. It's so harmonious and it's beautiful. That's not what happens when we work in silos. That's not what happens at all when we work in silos. When we work in silos, it's like we're a bunch of sled dogs pulling in different directions. And where's the sled going? Literally nowhere. The sled's just jostling around, bouncing the sled driver around. The dogs are pulling in wild and crazy directions. There's no consistency of effort. Sometimes there might be more dogs pulling in one way, so you start to go in that direction, but then one of the dogs gets, a wild hair and starts to go in another direction and you pull that way and you get nowhere. Imagine if your marketing and enrollment efforts were harnessed up and pulling in one direction. Imagine how far you could go. You could go so much farther than the alternative where you're just pulling at random and going nowhere. So the big question is, how do I start? And I know not everybody on this call is a chief marketing officer or a chief enrollment officer. There are people all across the organization attending this session. And so this is not just advice for those of you who sit at the top of the org chart. This is advice for everybody. The very, very first and most important thing to do is build relationships with your counterparts. Identify who in admissions or who in marketing is your counterpart and start working on building a relationship, whether that's going out for lunch, going out for coffee, going out for brews, whatever it is that you do to kind of build an authentic and real relationship is what you need to start with. When I started at Miami University, Brent Schock was the vice president for enrollment management. On my very first day, he was like, we're going to need to be friends. Like, this isn't optional. We're going to need to be friends. We're going to need to get along because my success is your success and vice versa. And he became such a dear friend. He actually named my tortoise. He is just a phenomenal human being. And what that friendship and that relationship allowed was when there were rocks in the road, we gave each other benefit of the doubt. When there were rocks in the road, we agreed to work together to remove those rocks. Nobody threw anybody else under the bus. Nobody ever just said, well, that's not my problem. That's Brent's problem. Or that's not my problem. That's Jamie's problem. We had a true, authentic relationship that was built on mutual respect that said, if there's a challenge, we're going to work through it together. If you don't start from a relationship, it's going to be so easy to revert back to that siloed way of thinking and so easy to revert back to that, not my job, not my problem, throwing people under the bus perspective. You have to build real and true relationships to get around that. And I know that that's going to be challenging. If you have a Jennifer that you don't get along with, I know that it is so challenging to start on a new page with somebody that you maybe don't have a good relationship. I'm going to tell you the story that kind of showcases how you could approach this. When I was at a previous institution, I did not yet oversee the campus radio station. And we hired a new station manager. And I apologize. I know he's not on here, but you're going to be able to figure out who it is. We hired a new station manager, and he immediately created in what appeared to be clip art a new logo for the radio station that completely butchered the institutional logo, and he printed it on about 10,000 items. And you can imagine, as the chief marketing officer, my reaction to that was not particularly positive. And he did not react well to my reaction. And we ended up having a very fraught relationship. And then the chancellor said to me, I think you should oversee the radio station. And suddenly this person that had been, I don't know if there's a nice way to say it, a real jerk to me, was my direct report. And I remember he came into my office for our first one-on-one, and he said, should I be cleaning out my desk? I imagine I'm not going to be here much longer. And I just put out my hand and said, I'm Jaime Hunt. It's nice to meet you. And he was floored, right? He took a step back and he was like, what do you mean? And I said, we're starting a new page. Let's start our relationship all over. Everything that happened in the past, let's put it in the past. Let's start over. And he became one of my dearest colleagues. We're still in touch to this day. He had my back. I had his back. It was a wonderful relationship, but it came from one of us being brave enough to say, I know we've had challenges in the past, but can we start over? It's really important to also start working towards shared goals. So setting this sort of common enrollment target or common enrollment profile, that is an important first step. Creating joint recruitment and communication strategies, aligning on those metrics, establishing those KPIs that both entities are monitoring and adjusting towards. One of my pet peeves is when I hear from clients that my admissions office won't share data with me. How in the world is marketing going to be effective at accomplishing those KPIs if they are not getting the data to know if that's being successful? Bringing those people to the table to establish and monitor those KPIs together is really important. Looking for opportunities to brainstorm and work together on projects. Maybe you're not ready yet to kind of work in a more cohesive way, but can you find a project that you can work on? Can you co-host a recruitment event? Can you do a brainstorming session around something together? If you're on the marketing side, can you invite admissions in to talk about something related to brand? If you're on the enrollment side, can you bring a marketer in to talk about how brand informs marketing? And then having those real open channels of feedback where you can have tough conversations about what's working and what isn't so that you can collaborate and adjust together. That is super, super important to have those touch points throughout the process. It's also important to bring more voices to the table. When we hold on to information and don't share it with our counterparts, we're limiting their perspective. And when we don't have their perspectives, we're not making the best decision. But it's also important to bring in people who aren't just at the leadership level into these conversations. When we leave out people who have boots on the ground, we're missing important insights. I don't think there is anyone who has better insights into what students are thinking than admissions counselors. And I don't think there is anyone that understands the challenges that students are facing with financial aid than the administrative assistants who sit at the front desk and hear the students waiting for their appointments, talking to each other, talking to their moms on the phone. If you're leaving out administrative assistants, you're missing important insights. If you're leaving out counselors, you're missing out on important insights. If you're not bringing students into the conversation, you're missing out on important insights. And there is no downside to this. There's no downside to more voices at the table. More voices at the table make the work product better and make the work much more fun and enjoyable. It's important to stop thinking about this is mine and that is yours, but start thinking about things as ours. Honestly, this collaboration takes muscle memory. When I told that story a little bit earlier about bringing that whole group together to solve the problem of the communications that went out from the time a student was admitted until they started classes, people were really resistant and were like, Jamie, I don't want to do this. This isn't my problem. This isn't my thing. Why am I here? This is dumb. One of the people who was the chief complainer about that, about 4 months after we did this project, called me and said, hey, Jamie, I'm thinking about pulling together a similar group to tackle this problem that I'm having. What do you think? Who do you think I should invite? That is my proudest moment. That will go down in history as my proudest moment in higher education, because this person saw the value of this collaboration and was building the muscle memory for collaborating with other people to serve our students. We are all in this together. We are all working together towards a shared goal. And that is what we need to develop the muscle memory for. So at the end of the day, this is my manifesto. Stop serving your department and start serving your audience, the students. Stop being territorial, start being collaborative. Stop working in isolation, start working as a team. Stop siloing data, start sharing intel, and stop thinking mine and start thinking ours. This is absolutely, I will go to, once I will retire once silos are gone in higher education. I anticipate that my children, great-grandchildren, and beyond will still be alive when there are still silos. But this is my true manifesto. We have to stop thinking about mine, and start thinking ours. So thank you so much for listening to me vent about silos for the past 40 minutes or so. You can get in touch with me here, and I'm happy to chat with you if you would like some ideas about what you can do on your campus. If you would like to have me come to your campus to talk about busting down silos, I'm happy to do that too. But now I think it's time for some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Jamie, thank you so much. That was just incredible. And I think really good advice overall for anyone in marketing or any institution. Really loved it. We have a couple of questions just to kick things off. How can admissions and marketing teams really align so that they can ensure a seamless student journey from initial inquiry to enrollment?
Yeah, so one of the projects I've tackled at a couple institutions and that I tackle as a consultant is kind of outlining what is that student journey, and defining, what are the key points, what are the key moments, and what do we want the students to think and feel at those moments, right? Because it's not just about what we want them to do. It's not just about what we want them to think, but it's also about what we want them to feel, because this choosing a college is both a rational and an emotional decision, right? So one of the ways that I recommend making sure that there's a lot of alignment and collaboration on this is creating a really big team to work on this project. So the last time I tackled this, when I was at an institution, I was at Old Dominion University, and I think we had 45 people involved in the project. We broke people into about 6 to 8 person teams to tackle a different portion of the work. And then I kind of was there to guide each team through the process. And it was a cross-functional team: marketing, student affairs, enrollment management. We had people from financial aid teamed up with people from housing. I mean, it was these really diverse teams. We brought in the academic deans and their communicators. We brought in non-communicators. And it was a really good way, I think, for people to start thinking more cross-functionally and more in a more collaborative way. And I think that's a really great way to tackle the project. Don't make it one person's assignment or one department's assignment. I got the VP for enrollment. She's over enrollment and student affairs. I got her to be, and the provost to be executive sponsors with me on the project so that there was buy-in from above for this, tackling it in this really broad way. I think we even had people from research, and there was no office that was safe from Jaime Hunt saying, "Hey, you're involved in this project now." But I think that's a really good way to start to think about that student journey in a much more large scale and fulsome way.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Thank you. So what KPIs should folks be looking for and their teams be looking for to track the success of their joint efforts? And how, when you're telling someone, hey, I want to pull in all these people, they start to do math on what those people should be doing. How do you use that data to inform future strategies?
Yeah. So honestly, the last time I did this on a campus, and then when I did this as a consultant, one of the subgroups tasks was to identify the key KPIs that we would use to measure the success. And the reason why I like to do it like that is because that gives people, it gives another perspective on what KPIs we might look at. So if I just had me and the admissions director deciding the KPIs, we may not have somebody from housing saying, you know what, we really need to see how often people are swiping into their rooms, or if they're just staying in their rooms. I think one metric for success would be, for retention would be, are they, swiping at the dining hall? Are they sleeping in their rooms, or are they going back home? That kind of thing. So I think it's really individual to the campus, but I would say, for the ultimate goal for these projects has been improved yield, reduced melt, improved persistence from freshmen or from fall to spring, and improved retention. I mean, I think those are ultimately the big KPIs for a project like that. And then the question is, how do you get there? And that's where these projects, I think, can be really helpful.
Excellent. What are some of the common challenges that are faced by admissions and marketing teams when they're trying to break down silos and work together? And how do you recommend addressing these challenges?
Yeah. Challenges that I often hear tend to come around to territoriality. So one or the other uh, entity has a leadership that is territorial. And I think that if you're in that situation and you're not a more senior staffer, it can be really hard to break that down. But if you're, a director level or something, I think that idea of starting to build relationships with your peers in the department to kind of create those connections. So even if the VPs aren't necessarily working together, the directors are kind of starting to collaborate. Even if you're trying to identify a small project that you could collaborate on. I also find, I think that CMOs, so I think that admissions VPs tend to be more territorial about their data, their goals. I've heard where they say like they won't share the strategic enrollment plan with us, that kind of thing. And I think marketing VPs tend to be more like, that's not my job. That's not my problem. I'm responsible for brand. I'm not responsible for admissions. Some of us have enrollment marketing report to us and others don't. And so I think starting to shift that perspective of, okay, but if admissions fails, I'm not going to have the job. Like that's not my job, but I'm not going to have a job if they fail. And if I don't share this information, marketing's not going to be able to help me accomplish my goals. And so reframing how you think about territoriality, I think is really, really important.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. I have one last question before we start to transition. And honestly, it's gives you a chance for a little bit of self-promotion, but to share some of the other things you've, you know, theories and advice that you've shared. What are some of the recent topics you've covered on your podcast? Confessionals of a higher ed CMO, and what do you recommend to this audience to pick up other than the whole podcast?
Yeah. So I am going to be posting today on my LinkedIn, Jaime Hunt, Jaime, a list of podcast episodes that touch on enrollment and enrollment marketing and recruitment topics. So I'll be publishing that later today. There's a whole bunch. I think I have 8 or 10 of the 60 some episodes are on that topic. But I also touch on things like artificial intelligence, marketing and branding, building a personal brand, building an employer brand. So there's a ton of different topics on the podcast, but there's definitely a lot of enrollment marketing weaved in.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. Jamie, this has been a very informational and thoughtful session. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for being part of Innovate 2024.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Excellent.